Hey guys, Charlie from Airplane Academy here. If you've been watching this channel for any amount of time, you know that I'm a huge advocate that I think everyone ought to consider pursuing aviation. But today I'm gonna flip that around and argue against myself, and I'm gonna give you 4 reasons that I think you absolutely should not pursue aviation. Getting to know you guys down in the comments, I realized that a lot of people are on the fence about whether or not to become a pilot, either just as a hobby or professionally, or should I rent an airplane? Should I buy an airplane? What does that look like? And those are all very legitimate hesitations. And so really my goal today is to try to give you some arguments as to why I don't think it's a good idea for you to pursue it right now. Now, is my end goal that I want to talk you out of aviation? Well, no, not necessarily. But my goal for this video is I hope that you will arrive in one of 3 places. And the first kind of camp that you could end up in is either 1, I absolutely want to pursue aviation. I know some of the downsides or some of the challenges, but I am all in, baby. Let's go for it. And that'd be awesome. The second camp could be the opposite. Say, hey, you know what? I don't think this is right for me. I can appreciate it from afar, but it doesn't make sense for me to actually go pursue my license. But then the third camp, and the one that I think could be really helpful for some of us to arrive at, is saying, yes, I want to pursue this. I know I do, just not right now. And I don't know about for you guys, but for me, a lot of times I can get kind of some FOMO and just be processing decisions over and over in my head where I'm like, this is something I want to do, but do I do it now? Do I do it later? And I think that we can kind of get some peace about some big decisions like becoming a pilot by saying, yes, I want to do it, just not in this season of life. And there's some compelling reasons as to why I think you could end up there. But I'm hoping that you'll end up in one of those 3 places and have a little bit more confidence as to kind of where you land on your pursuit of aviation. So let's dive in. The first reason I think you shouldn't pursue aviation is all of the training involved. Now, I don't mean this from like an intelligence perspective of, oh, you have to be, this tall to ride the ride. You have to be this smart to become a pilot. I don't mean that at all. Listen, if I can become a pilot, you can become a pilot. And there's so many awesome resources out there in flight schools, and there's so much stuff that's gonna help you learn what you need to know. It's very, very doable. But I mean, you really have to have the mindset if you're going to become a pilot, whether as a hobby or as a profession, you have to have the mindset that I am ready to become a student for the rest of my life. I'm ready to be learning and spending a lot of time trying to attain all of that knowledge and proficiency. In fact, that's why I've named this Airplane Academy. Not because I think I have the wisdom of God to share with you in terms of aviation. I don't. I absolutely don't. But I have learned as a pilot that I'm always learning, and I always need to be open to the idea that I need to keep learning. And so Airplane Academy is a way for me to just try to convey that I'm learning a lot. It's kind of, pursuing aviation is an academy in itself, and I want to invite you into that journey that we can all learn together. So you really need to have that mindset if you're going to be pursuing your pilot's license. The second reason I think you should not pursue aviation is the time commitment involved. And this is both in terms of being a student pilot and just even getting your pilot's license, your private license, but then even after the fact, what does that look like for you to go exercise your pilot privileges and rent an airplane or buy an airplane or join a club? Like, what are you going to do? Aviation is not one of those things where you can just put it down for a few months and jump back in and you're, as sharp as when you left. I mean, that's life, right? Like most things are like that. But aviation, the stakes are high. You really have to be committed to staying proficient. And kind of to the last point, you always have to have a student mentality of wanting to learn. So even if you're just getting your pilot's license, your initial private, you really need to wait, I think, until you're in a season of life where you can commit to this. Because even just getting your private is probably going to take 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 months, depending on how often you're flying and training and such. And you have to be ready to commit to that. So many people will start their license and their training and they won't ever finish. Or some other people will get their license and then as soon as they finish, they just stop flying altogether. That's so common, and I just hate for you to invest all that time and energy and resources and then not actually finish or not really exercise your privileges once you become a pilot. So you need to be ready to commit a lot of time to this. The third reason you shouldn't pursue aviation is access to an aircraft. I would really encourage you, if you're wanting to become a pilot, that you would have a plan in place for what you're going to fly after you finish your training, after you get your pilot's license. I think a lot of people just don't have a plan in place, and so they get their license and they're so excited and they want to take a break from training and kind of the pressure of it and everything, and then a few weeks turns into a few months, which turns into a few years. Before you know it, you have never flown. And I don't think it has to be this way. And there's a whole spectrum of things you can do. And it doesn't have to be owning an airplane, right? You can rent airplanes and you can know what that financial cost is going to be ahead of time because you know the hourly rates. You can look up clubs like flying clubs in your area that you can join, and you can get really, really good rates to rent those aircraft. You can join an EAA chapter, an Experimental Aircraft Association chapter, and maybe you could find someone that's looking for a partner in one of their aircraft. There's so many ways to find airplanes that you're going to be able to fly afterwards, and I would just at least have a loose idea of what that's going to be. So as soon as you finish your training, you're ready just to continue on and actually exercise your pilot privileges. The fourth and final reason I think you shouldn't pursue aviation is the financial costs involved. Now, aviation is expensive. There's really no way around that. Yeah, there's a spectrum of ways you can do it more expensively or less expensively, but it's all expensive. I mean, even getting your private pilot's license is probably $7,000 to $10,000 depending on how you do it and where you are and how often you're flying and what type of aircraft you're flying, all that stuff. Getting your instrument rating will be a little less than that, but probably around $8,000. I did a video on that, kind of showcasing what that's made up of and maybe how to save a little bit. The link will be down in the description. But it's really expensive, right? The good thing is there is so much data out there that you can really have a pretty good estimate as to what this is going to cost you, both in terms of getting your license, but then renting aircraft or owning an aircraft. I put together an extensive video, the link will be down in the description, that talks about the ownership costs of 7 aircraft that are traditionally more kind of entry level. Now, it's all in relation, it's still expensive, right? But I broke down in a very detailed manner, how much this would cost you on a monthly basis to own and operate an aircraft. Now, I was not making an argument that this is a lot of money or this is a little money or you should be able to afford it or you shouldn't be able to. Not really taking a stand on any of those things. I'm just presenting, here's the data based off of all my research and my personal experience owning a Cessna 182. But generally speaking, aviation is expensive. And so if you're not ready or willing or in a place where you're able to dedicate the financial resources needed to pursue it, I would just encourage you to wait until you're in a season where that is the case. I know for me, in my 16 years of flying right now, I didn't own an airplane until the last 3.5, 4 years, right? And so before then I was renting when I could and just doing anything I could to maintain my currency, but it's not like I've owned an airplane that whole time. I had to wait until I was in a season of life where that made more sense for me. And so, if you don't feel like you can afford it right now, I wouldn't count yourself out. Please don't hear me say, oh, you shouldn't come do this because you don't have enough money. I would never say that. That's not what I'm saying now. I'm just saying I would encourage you to research, what it is you're wanting to do in aviation, how often you're wanting to fly, and then figure out what is that going to take. Is that realistic for me to dedicate those resources to it now, or does it make sense to do that later or never, right? Again, kind of those 3 camps. I would encourage you to think about which one you are ending up in, and you can make a decision. Now, my encouragement to you and kind of the way that I've approached the financial component of pursuing aviation, because it's expensive, my approach really comes down to 2 things. The first is living within your means. If you can just spend less than you make, life's good, right? And so doesn't matter if you make $1 a day or $1 million a day, right? That principle still applies, and that's what I've tried to live my life around. And then the second thing is that, everyone gets to decide where you want to dedicate your time, your resources, your effort, your stress level, your pursuits. What do you want to dedicate that towards? We don't have very much time in this life, and we get to decide what's important and where we dedicate that. And so for me, a portion of that is aviation. I want to spend a portion of my being, right, which includes, my checkbook, towards aviation. And for me, that's a decision I made. My wife's on board with that. That's something I want to pursue. And that's not for everybody, right? Everybody gets to decide what it is they're pursuing. And for me, a big portion of what I'm pursuing is aviation. And so my finances kind of reflect that. So if you can kind of take that own analysis for yourself and aviation can play a part of that, then awesome. But if it can't, or it can't right now, but it could later, that's awesome too. There is no judgment in any of this, but just wanted to give some insight as to how I've kind of approached it and kind of financially justified it. But again, I had to wait until a season of life to own an airplane where it made more sense. Again, there's a lot of other cheaper ways to experience aviation too. And so you don't have to be ready to fully own an airplane before you go dive in and pursue aviation. There's so many other versions of what pursuing aviation looks like, even starting with owning Microsoft Flight Simulator. The new one is outstanding. And so if that is how you pursue aviation, I think that is awesome. And that is still very much in my mind a way to pursue and experience and enjoy aviation. And then you can kind of go up from there and maybe find ways to be around the airport a little bit more. Go join a flying club, join an EAA chapter, start taking flight lessons, maybe figure out how to rent aircraft. There's a whole spectrum that we can enjoy this together. And so I'd really encourage you to do so in a way that makes sense for you in your season of life. So with all of those points in mind, I have a question for you. What camp are you in? Are you ready to pursue aviation all out, even knowing kind of the implications and the expenses involved? Or maybe is it the opposite? You're saying, hey, after kind of learning some of that information, this isn't for me, and that is totally okay too. Or maybe are you in that third camp where you definitely want to pursue it, but just not right now. You want to be in a different season of life when you can more fully devote yourself to it. What camp are you in? And if you're still undecided, would you just leave me a comment down below and voice whatever questions or concerns you have to maybe help get a little bit more clarity? I would love to help you if I can. If I don't have an answer to your question, I'll tell you that I don't know. But there's lots of other pilots around here that would love to help answer your question. It's a really, really awesome community. I have found that the aviation community always wants to help each other, particularly when it comes to recruiting, more and future pilots to help come join, the community. It's been an awesome community in that regard and in many others. So I hope you'll leave me a comment down below. I also hope you'll subscribe to this channel. Literally every additional subscriber we have helps me devote more time and resources to this channel and kind of push the envelope with some content that we're producing. Got some really fun stuff coming up that I've got planned out. And so really, truly, your subscription helps that directly. It doesn't cost you anything, but it helps produce more content in a very direct way. And so I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope you'll subscribe, and I hope to see you guys next Monday morning in our next video. So take care until then. See you guys next week.